welcome to Dream Machine. My name is Aaron.
And my name is Patricia.
Hey Patricia, how's it going?
I feel a lot better now, so thank you.
Yeah. Ready to take flight?
Yes, I'm definitely ready to take flight today.
Okay, thanks. So this film actually, I tell you what, actually does pull at my heartstrings a little bit, and so I tell you what, it is actually one of the films I've actually been looking forward to actually talking about. So
yeah, me too.
For many particular reasons. So let's not dither and let's sink our teeth into this. So,
all right, let's do it.
Here we go. So How to Train Your Dragon is a computer-animated film from DreamWorks Animation based on the 2003 book of the same title. The film is directed by Lilo and Stitch directors Chris Sanders and Dean DuBois, who also works at Disney. The film stars the voices talents of Jay Bothniel, America Ferrera, Jonah Hill, Jared Butler, Christopher Mintz-Plasse, and Craig Ferguson. So I just butchered most of those names. But so the film was released in March 26th of 2010, and it came to widespread universal acclaim. And I have to say, for the film on its own, I think is definitely something really worth checking out. But I also like this for other reasons as well. So.
Yeah, I do as well. And I think that this is when DreamWorks was starting to get back on track with their films. Ever since the likes of Kung Fu Panda and this film, this is when it would start branching out into more sequels, and it would get films to be critically acclaimed amongst critics and fans. And I think that, after a few years of stumbling with a few mediocre films, these two films were able to kind of like bring DreamWorks back on track, especially since this was around the time in which Pixar was not doing very well. We already talked about like the slump that Pixar was going through with the likes of Cars 3 and Brave and Monsters University. And this was kind of like when Disney was kind of like on its comeback with Princess and the Frog and Tangled. So at the time, it was kind of like a fight between either Disney or DreamWorks that were kind of like, which one was releasing like better films. And more animation studios were kind of like putting their, films into the ring, such as like Leica released Coraline a year prior. I believe that around the same time there was the Secret Book of Kells. So there were a lot of animated films that were coming out around the 2010s, and a new decade meant that some new films were coming out and kind of like bringing a new renaissance of animated features.
Mm-hmm. So, I think in regards to how you train your dragon from a personal point of view, the reason why I like this concept is because for those of you who do not know, I actually do own a Sega Saturn. And so, one of my favorite game franchises on Sega Saturn was Panzer Dragoon. And so I played the first game, and I liked it. It was kind of an arcade game, and so yeah, it was okay for me. But I really got into Panzer Dragoon when Panzer Dragoon Saga came out, one of the very rare RPGs that you can actually buy for the Sega Saturn. And I paid nearly about $100, I think, for it. So it's like,
Jeez, man.
And it came on 4 discs, and I tell you what, I loved it. It was such a huge game, and I'm currently trying my best to replay it at the minute, and I'm currently halfway through, so I'm on like, this game was serious. This was on 4 discs. So like, you can probably imagine it was a huge adventure. So, I've got through like the first 2 discs, and I'm currently trying to get through the next 2 discs to get through. So it's you can probably imagine it's a pretty steep adventure, and so I really like the concept of like, here's this kid with this dragon and he's flying around with him and stuff, and he's kind of challenging concepts and stuff, and so I think that whole thing just gives me kind of nostalgic feelings towards when I was playing Panzer Dragoon Saga. So that's the reason why I love this film so much.
Yeah, that's a pretty good reason, yeah. Especially since, I do know a lot of people love the Panzer Dragoon Saga games, and it's a lot of people are wondering, like, why aren't there any more of them? So
Something to do with Sega not doing so well in the console market and now developing umpteen amounts of Sonic games with their OCs and yeah, some very crazy stuff like that. But we weren't going to go into that dark place.
Sure.
Yeah, so going back to How to Train Your Dragon. I like in regards to the story, I like how this is actually the story is laid out. It's not your typical like here's this character, he's not like everybody else, and he doesn't think like everybody else. In actual fact, he actually wants to be part of that trend of like wanting to go out with his Viking colleagues and actually go out and kill dragons and stuff. So
it makes a lot of sense because, he's seen as the weak link amongst everybody else, and his father is actually like the ruler amongst this Viking tribe. So the fact that his father always sees him as a disappointment, and he wants to be just like his father because everybody else, respects and they, follow his lead. So I can understand why he wants to be exactly like the other Vikings.
Like how many other films have we actually, very mediocre films have we come to the point where it's like, here's this character, he doesn't want to be like everybody else, then shenanigans happen. And like, there's too many of those films. I'm glad that's not one of them. And that's How to Train Your Dragon is basically with our main character. He wants to be like everyone else, and but he wants to do it in obviously a different way to show everybody that he's actually capable of like killing a dragon. So he gets his luck to and ends up striking the Night Fury, which is like the most ferocious dragon of them all, and but then no one believes that he's actually done it. So he goes out into the woods and actually finds the dragon, only to find that he's actually injured it rather than actually killed it.
Yeah, not only injured it, but a part of his tail is gone so that he can no longer fly. And so he starts really feeling really sorry for it, and he befriends it, which, in his tribe, he can't do that because they are very anti-dragon. But he built a connection to it, he even names it Toothless because it has retractable teeth. And so he decides that he's going to build a prosthetic tail for Toothless. It kind of reminds me of that dolphin tail movie, the one where the dolphin was like really sick and then, a part of its tail had to be removed and it wasn't swimming properly. So they made a prosthetic tail. So it kind of reminded me of that a little bit. But I think that one of the things that I did really like about this movie starting off was that, he's a really good inventor. He, the reason why is because he was an apprentice with this blacksmith and he learned about like inventing things, and he doesn't do it very well all the time, but he's able to, take what he was able to learn a little bit, apprenticing with this, with this blacksmith, and he's able to make this, this tail for him. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs in a sense, in which you have this inventor who didn't do very well with inventing his items. And then all of a sudden he invents this one item and accidentally it like helps the entire town with it raining food. So, I mean, it doesn't also, it kind of, reminded me of that a little bit.
I was going to say, we're going to cover Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs?
No, that is a Sony film.
That is a Sony film. Okay, that's why we're covering that. So, like, hey, but by the way, like, I'm sorry I ask all these dumb questions, but I mean, in regards to like DreamWorks films, there's a ton of them. So I kind of keep forgetting which ones actually belong to the DreamWorks, saga, and which ones don't.
It's actually true, yeah, because with Pixar, as of right now, there are 20 films, 21 when Toy Story 4 comes out. And as for DreamWorks, there are 36 films because How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World had just came out. So there are a lot of films that we have to work on. And we're almost like 2/3 finished. So we still have a lot to go.
I'll tell you what I think. And if it's going to go the way I think it's going to go, I think there's going to be a strong message at the very end of it. But I'm going to say that's at the very end of DreamMachine. So that gives you something to look forward to. But anyway, getting back to How to Train Your Dragon. So, I mean, the one thing I do say about the first act is that doesn't this film go into danger of like being really disliking most of the characters except for the protagonist?
I mean, it kind of does because you see when you see Hiccup and Toothless have this really nice relationship, everybody else just kind of like is against Hiccup because he's not as strong as everybody else.
Yeah.
And then when Hiccup defeats the dragons, not by like physical force, but by like really clever ways, like either like tickling them or finding a weak spot or anything like that, then everybody just gets jealous of him. They're not like, oh, we're really happy for you. I mean, the only one is his father, but that's because he thinks that he's like being a a
Well,
ruthless killer.
everyone gets really impressed by him eventually, but I think here's the thing about this, and I think it goes back to our next character. I think obviously is our kind of our other arc. I think in all of this, and that is the introduction of Astrid. And
Yeah.
and she's kind of seen as like this, like high school royalty, kind of like at the beginning, but then you get kind of to see that she's actually got an edge to her, and she's very competitive, and she's obviously not she's not your typical she's obviously not your typical love interest at all. Like
No,
she's
she's not. She's like a very tough character. And she doesn't really like fall in love with Hiccup until like much later on in the
Yeah,
movie.
I'm just thinking, is Astrid like was she on the? Cause obviously, there was like a trope at one point where there was this the hopeless love interest where she's like she constantly need rescuing. When did we kind of bridge away that that trope of character, and then we kind of went into kind of characters like Astrid and Colette and from Ratatouille, and I mean obviously we
I
have
think
you could
that's
throw in you could throw in Princess Fiona, I guess you could throw her into it as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I think that around this point in time, I don't know when exactly, but I think it was like during like the late 90s and 2000s in which like or even back into like the 70s with the Superman films when they made Lois Lane into a much more three-dimensional character. I guess this was definitely around the time in which like women empowerment was like really important and it was just showcasing that hey, women don't just, become the damsel in distress for the men. They don't just sit at home and cook and clean and stuff like that. They can be capable of doing just as well. And there've been a lot of like TV shows in which they've introduced a lot more female characters like Tiny Toons and such. And then eventually, there was a lot more like action-packed superhero TV shows that introduced women being like very powerful. Like, they introduced Batgirl and Batman the animated series. There was X-Men the animated series where you had Rogue and Storm and Jubilee. Cyber Six is another one of them. So
yeah.
I guess like over time, we started to see a lot more stronger and more complex female characters. And, Astrid is definitely one of them in
Yeah,
which
and I'm really glad that we actually see a character like Astrid because I think I think it is playing into the demand of like, hey, we've got this action film. Well, why don't we just make the love interest action packed as well? And it's like, yeah, more action. It's like the audience is asking for it, and now studios are starting to give with these type of characters, which I'm really cool. Which I think is really cool because now it gives you something, not only like both guys and girls can get into. It's like it's really cool
yeah,
to
yeah.
watch
It
that.
was definitely a time in which when I don't know about how it is over with you, Aaron, but there was a time in which when there was like a divide between like what shows or what movies you can watch. It's like, oh, you can't watch Transformers because it's a boys show, or
Hmm.
we had My Little Pony and She-Ra, and that's supposed to be a girl show. So
Yeah.
over time, since they were like evenly distributing like male and female characters, it became a lot more apparent that hey, we can watch this regardless if you're a girl or a boy. But sadly, even that's still a thing. I remember seeing something on Twitter. It's like this guy was saying, hey, I have a 5-year-old daughter and she's wearing Star Wars sneakers.
So
And yeah, exactly. So, and then there was this commotion in like her classmates saying like, "Oh, you can't wear that because Star Wars is for boys." It's like, give me a break.
yeah, it's like it's just ridiculous all of that going on still. But so anyway, we wandered straight off of How to Train Your Dragon, but so I guess with with the story, I think obviously with also you got entitled that all as well. You got the you got the story between the boy and his dad. This Hiccup
Yeah.
and his father, and you can tell they don't interact. And I'll tell you what, this actually bodes true to a lot of father son relationships. Like they feel like one is not listening to the other all that well. And so it's something that, and and it's only that you got that. When did Call of Duty Chance of Meatballs come out? Did it come out at the same
2000,
time?
yeah, it was 2009, so it came out a year before.
Yeah. So I mean, that was obviously something that was that seems to be kind of a trope that seems to be going on. Like fathers and sons not really listening to each other that well. Like in
Yeah, yeah.
the
I definitely see like a Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs vibe whenever I'm seeing How to Train Your Dragon. Like you have the kid who's like this awkward inventor and you have his relationship with his dad, and then, he's trying to mingle with this girl that he has a crush on, and she's kind of like trying to do this facade in which like she's something that she's not, even
yeah.
though in Astrid's case, she is really tough. So yeah, I can't really think about, How to Train Your Dragon without thinking of Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs.
Yeah, you could say there's a lot of things you could throw in. I mean, like you could say there's some Ratatouille in there as well. Like obviously with the strong female interest, and also the idea that he has to basically do these things to get the dragon to fly again, and obviously kind of the same way that Remy has to kind of control Linguini in order how to cook. It's like you can see there's like something bits of that in there as well, and there's another film in there that kind of slips my mind a little bit, and yeah, I can't remember what other film that was as well, but yeah, you can tell that there's a lot of inspiration in there. I think.
Yeah, yeah.
From
And I
other
guess it makes a
things.
lot of sense because Chris Sanders did work on Lilo and Stitch,
Hmm.
and he is very familiar with writing, animated features in which they kind of have like, stereotypical tropes, but they're able to write it in a way that is like very unique. So it kind of fits in the same way with How to Train Your Dragon. Like if you were to talk about like the concept of Lilo and Stitch, it's about an alien who lands on Earth and tries to mingle with this family, very ET like. But it's very different because it takes place in Hawaii and the girl is very weird and quirky, and she's going through the struggle with her sister because there's this agency that doesn't think that she can take care of Lilo. So yeah, it's very different. And with How to Train Your Dragon, it's a very similar thing. It's like, oh, boy with creature, boy with dragon in this case, very similar to like Pete's Dragon and very similar movies like that. And and then we just talked about all the other films that we kind of compared it to, but at the same time, it kind of like brings a different feel to it. Now, I don't know how it's similar to the book. I'm sure it's very faithful to the book.
I'll be honest with you, I never read the book, so
Yeah, me
I'm
neither.
I'm looking at this from clear vision at the minute with no other. Maybe Space Bands of Dragon Saga, besides that, but I'm looking at this purely from the film within the film's container, pretty much, and
Hmm.
not anything else. But yeah, I think in regards to like the whole world and how it's all put together, I like how it's. I guess you could say I don't know. It's like the world's interesting. I would say
Sure.
I don't think it's necessarily. I mean, you can tell like the way it's designed and everything. Like you can tell it's definitely supposed to be taking place in like Nordic world. Pretty much, obviously not strictly, obviously of that nature, but obviously within a real world context. But I don't know. It's like you can tell it's on like on a coast where. I don't really know what the best ways to kind of. I don't know if here's the thing. I don't know if I either like it or if I don't like it. It's just kind of like that's one thing I think I will say about this. The where it's taking place. It's not all that interesting, really, and really the emphasis of the positivity I think in the film is more based on the characters and based on the concept, really. And so yeah, that's whether I like the locations or not of where this film is. I'm not entirely sure.
I mean,
Cause
to be quite honest, I mean, when you take a look at the location, I mean, you have a small Viking village, you have mountains, you have forests, you have the ocean, and you have this tournament, and then eventually you have this final battle with the dragon's nest. I mean, once you kind of like know the basic setting, it's kind of like it doesn't really give too much variety, I mean, unlike
yeah,
something like Ants, in which you have the ant colony, and then eventually you wander outside into like there's the river, there's the picnic, there's Insectopia, and it kind of, I mean, sure, it's very basic with its settings, but it's able to like be visually appealing. Prince of Egypt is the same way. You have Egypt, you have the desert, and then eventually you have the little small village, and then you have to go back to Egypt again with the
mm,
desert. And each and every single one of the DreamWorks films, they kind of like mix up their settings. Even though they're very basic settings, they actually try to mix it up and be a little bit more varied. Shrek
I
is
think
also a similar thing.
I think you could definitely make the argument about even Joseph and Technicolor Dreamcoat. Like at least you can say it moved around. Like in this, it
Sure.
kind of feels like it stays in one place and only moves away when it has to go to like the dragon's nest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, the one thing that I do have to give it credit for is that whenever that you have the scenes with Hiccup and Toothless flying, it does feel like really, really good. Like the flying effects are amazing, I have to say.
Yeah, it is. I like the how it's all, it seems all thought out as well. By the way, the other film I was thinking of was Spider-Man. Like, when he finally gets, I remember the, not, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, where he's like trying to figure out his powers and everything, and here's Hiccup. I'm just trying to figure out, how's this dragon gonna fly again? How on earth am I gonna get its tail to work the way it is? And he's having to kind of like put it all together and everything. And it's kind of like that, figuring out how to do things, if you will. Like, here's this new power, and now I've got to figure out how to do it. You know.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I guess you could say that. Yeah, it does definitely feel like, the effects of Spider-Man in which he's flying around from building to building. I guess it was kind of like an influence for, for those scenes in which Hiccup and Toothless are flying.
yeah. So we build up to the point where the father actually goes away, and so they move him out of the story pretty much to allow the development for Hiccup and obviously Toothless to figure things out, and then you obviously get the other characters also involved as well, which I think was a good move, because obviously if you had him just kind of like involved in the whole process, I think you would just kind of sat there and thought eventually he's going to figure this out, like
Yeah,
halfway
yeah.
through. Like, so it's so the fact that he comes back empty-handed after trying to find the first dragon's nest before the winter, and then he realizes that Hiccup hasn't really been the folly that he thought he was going to be, and then all of a sudden, it's he's thrust into that Hiccup is thrust into that position of having to prove himself and kill this dragon, and so he has to realize what he's going to have to do next, and so. Then it all kind of falls apart at that point, where it's he almost gets killed by this other dragon after the actions of his hopeless dad, and then obviously we get the reveal that Toothless is there, and they realize that he's been controlling the Night Fury this entire time, and so
Yeah, and this is a really nice scene, by the way, in which you see the struggles between the relationship between Hiccup and his dad. I really like this, in which like he finds out that throughout this entire time he wasn't like slaying dragons, and that he has been keeping Toothless behind his back. And he really thought that he had started to become a stronger warrior, and then when he finds out that he hasn't been, he just feels like really defeated. And then he kind of like tells him off and saying like, this is who I am. And so then eventually, when he leaves him, then we see this really strong scene in which, now the father's thinking to himself, should I disown my son? Should I should I go after him and try to accept his faults? Is like, what do I do? And it's very interesting because there's a lot of adults who kind of like stick to their ways, and no matter how many times that the child tells them, I don't like the way that you're acting, why can't you just think of it this way? They will never change. They will only change in which they feel like they need to, but for the most part they still stick to their old ways. And I really do like this scene, by the way.
hmm So we get to the point where obviously we get the scene with the Vikings going to take on the dragons, and then they realize that they finally realize that the dragons are not the ones that they should be worried about. It's actually the big massive dragon that comes flying out of the comes mashing his way out of the mountain, and then it kind of like everything just kind of gets revealed at that point, that everything that he was saying was true. And so then you got Hiccup having to figure out, how am I going to stop all this from happening? How am I going to save Toothless? And so then they obviously get the other dragons out and fly over, and they have this really awesome scene, which I think the out of all the scenes, I think probably the final third is probably my favorite, probably.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, it definitely is a lot more action packed, and you see the threat in the giant dragon when they're trying to fight it.
Mm-hmm. So obviously the Hiccup nearly sacrifices himself to basically kill this dragon, and you get this like a really cool like cloud fighting scene where it looks like it's just like this storm that's just kind of like happening at them in the clouds, and no one knows what's going on. And I think that's a really cool scene to kind of end on. And funnily enough, at the end of it, that you get those like cop out scenes of like, it's we all think he's dead, and then all of a sudden he comes back. Like, but then in this scene, they actually don't really they actually do something really clever with it, which is like, yeah, he's alive, but not all of him's there, and so then he wakes up and realizes that he's actually got a false leg.
Yeah,
And
yeah. That was like really shocking when I first saw it, in which he started waking up and then when he, gets out of his bed, you see that he has a prosthetic leg and he starts feeling really sad at first because, he lost his leg, but then he starts to kind of like take advantage of the fact that, he can be able to use it.
yeah,
The wonderful scene in which when, he's riding Toothless and then he has like a little hook that's right attached to it. And so then he starts riding, Toothless again, and then he starts feeling really happy again. And yeah, I think that
the one thing I'll say about it though is that I wish they kind of paced it out a bit more. Like I would have liked, it's like saying, "Oh, hey, I've lost my leg," and like if anyone lost their limbs, they'd be pretty devastated. It would take a bit of time for them to kind of like, get used to that. But
sure.
I would have liked them playing out that a bit more. So I would have liked to have had like Hiccup was really upset about losing his leg, but then he's reminded by Toothless that Toothless lost it, part of his tail, and he's managed to actually get through it by being helped out by Hiccup. So maybe you could say it's like, here's a return to the favor, and I'll help you try and get it back on your leg. And that you could have played that out a bit more, and then you kind of like so then you can like strengthen the. I know like the relationship between Toothless and Hiccup is already kind of like established pretty much throughout the rest of the film, but I felt that kind of like would have been a nice kind of like cherry on the cake, if you will. Like
maybe it would have been really nice if maybe Hiccup would have like taken a moment to walk away and maybe feel defeated that he lost his leg while fighting the dragon, and then maybe he sees Toothless flying, and then he remembers, oh yeah, that's right, part of his tail was gone and now he has this prosthetic tail. Or maybe, he could have been talking to his dad or maybe to Astrid or something about like, that now he doesn't feel like a full man anymore because part of his leg is gone. So yeah, I can see where you're coming from, that maybe there should have been like another scene there where he starts feeling defeated, the fact that he lost his leg, and then, maybe that final part in which now he starts taking advantage of it.
Yeah. So, the characters in all of this. I mean, Jay Baruchel as Hiccup. I don't really like his voice. I got to be honest. It kind of I don't know why. I was watching the whole film and it didn't kind of fit all that well. Like, I really wish they went with a different, kind of more youthful voice actor, if you will. And,
I mean, yeah, because Hiccup is supposed to be 15, and he sounds like he's way older.
Yeah, it sounds like who was it who played the kid in the Lorax movie? Like,
Zac Efron.
Zac Efron, yeah, like it kind of feels like that. Like it just doesn't go.
And here's the thing: like Ted is supposed to be like younger. I think he's supposed to be like 12, and he sounds like he's in his 20s.
Exactly, and so, but mind you, I will say about the rest of the voice acting. I mean, Jared Butler does really well as Stark the Vast, and being the leader of the tribe, and being being big, strong Viking, and being quite hard headed, and so he really captures the character in that sense. And,
yeah, he definitely did a lot better than in like the Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah, I mean, like, but on top of that as well, when you want him to be like this, this big heavy dude, like he can do it, and then when you want him to be like really emotional on his knees, you can feel that.
Sure,
like, there it is, and so I can't fault any of the rest of the voice acting. Like,
no, everybody else did pretty good.
Yeah, I like American Ferrera. I think she's pretty.
Yeah, me too.
I think she sounds really good, and also I can say that I'm sure, and also on top of that as well, that Hiccup Astrid shipping is just it's basically a battle cruiser going through space, and it's just that everyone really loves it, watching these two together. So
yeah,
it's like it was one of the ships that actually kind of like you could. Watching like on fan art and listening, reading fan fiction, and like they really want to develop this relationship between the two, and so they really like that. So so I'm sure the fans are very happy with that. So in the music as well, I mean the music wasn't really all that noteworthy. Really, it was kind of like they try. You can tell there was like hints of like his this European Viking story. But they kind of threw in kind of like the the usual. It kind of felt a bit too usual for me. in regards to
Yeah,
like the
and,
music.
and this is one DreamWorks film that wasn't done by Hans Zimmer, and you could definitely tell.
Yeah, and also on top of that, as well, when the giant dragon came out, it's like they did like the whole Godzilla thing, which is kind of like it's you kind and after you've seen Godzilla, you kind of like already used to kind of like that whole play up, if you will. So
Hmm.
yeah, it would have been nice if they kind of like did something different with it, but they didn't. So
Yeah.
but anyway, I still love this movie regardless of
Yeah,
its
me
flaws.
too.
You
It's
get
definitely one of my
Yeah,
favorites.
and I'm not gonna kid anybody here. This movie does has flaws, but in regards to like me personally enjoying it, I did enjoy it. So
Yeah, me too.
and I am looking forward to watching How to Train Your Dragon 2. So
Yeah, and The Hidden World.
and the Hidden World. So this film had a budget of $165 million, and it grossed about $494 million across the world, which isn't a huge amount, but I guess you could say it was enough to warrant a sequel.
Yeah, it
So.
was enough to warrant a sequel, and not only that, but it also had a TV series on Cartoon Network.
And I think eventually we will. I mean, obviously we got some other Pixmix stuff to do, but if we ever get to that point, I'm sure we'll try and cover it. So
I mean, it has the most seasons out of all of the DreamWorks animated, series. It has 8 seasons.
wow.
Yeah, I know. Like all the others, they had like 2 seasons, maybe three. I think that Penguins of Madagascar had like 4 or 5, but no, the How to Train Your Dragon series has 8.
I tell you what, I'm actually looking to see. Yeah, and also as well, it hasn't. Well, I guess I couldn't blame it for having 8 seasons because there's interesting characters in it. So
Yeah,
it's
and
not.
it just ended like what? I think it ended like last year or something. So it makes a lot of sense because I think that it took place like between the first and the second one. And I don't know if they continued the series like from the second one onward. I'm not sure. But yeah, it definitely goes to show you that they had a lot to work with, with the books and then, building up more of the world and then maybe new dragons and developing the characters. So I can see why it was a huge success.
Cool. So that leaves us with How You've Trained Your Dragon, and that's pretty much wraps that one up. So coming up next, we'll be talking about Shrek Forever After.
Yes, the final film in the Shrek series
Yeah.
until the reboot comes out, but that's still up for debate.
Okay. So from me, Aaron,
And Patricia,
take care and bye for now.
see you later.